Hey there folks, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today we're going to quickly discuss the 5 starting archetypes, what I like about them and what I dislike about them, and I'm going to give them an overall rank that I arbitrarily assigned. I want to make this as fast as possible, so let's just get into it. We're going to start with the Challenger, the meat and potatoes archetype. It's not the most flashy kit around, but it gets the job done, and it can be tailored to almost any playstyle. So let's talk about its traits, its perks, and its skills. The prime perk is basically your cheat death. Once every 10 minutes you can just die and then get right back up, full HP and 3 seconds of invulnerability to reload and reposition. This cooldown does reset when you touch a world stone, so it's pretty much a god tier perk for real. The damage perk, Close Quarters, is one of the best in the game. It's 35% to all damage types, and 10% chance to crit enemies as long as you're within 10 meters, which only then tapers off to 20 meters, so you can still get like half your effectiveness out to 15 meters. And this is a huge buff compared to Remnant 1, where the Scrapper armor had its range out to 7 meters, and there was a hard stop right there. Unfortunately, there's no damage reduction attached to this like the Scrapper set had. The team perk, Intimidating Presence, is kind of an odd one. When you activate a skill, only activate, enemies within 10 meters deal 10% less damage for 15 seconds. But this damage reduction scales up to 2.5% per enemy effective, up to 4 additional enemies. So it's not a lot of damage reduction, but it also only puts the debuff on the enemies when you activate the skill. So if you use your Rampage or your Berserk skills, which are buffs for you, only the enemies that were nearby when you first activated the skill get debuffed. So really, you won't be getting this buff a whole lot, except for maybe some bosses or some elites, which I guess is okay, but it's also not a lot of damage reduction anyway for a class that's supposed to be designed for melee. Next, the utility perk Powerlifter. The stamina usage and regen penalties are cut in half, and that's insanely good. So you can have heavy armor and have the same stamina regen and consumption as wearing medium armor. You still have the slower roll, but the stamina costs are always going to be the same, and that's very good. Stamina management is very crucial here in Remnant 2. Then we have the Relic perk, Base of Danger. Using a relic within 10 meters of an enemy grants 2 stacks of bulwark and 10% increased damage for 10 seconds. See, this is better than Intimidating Presence because it's a buff that goes on the player, not the enemies, so as long as you activated it near an enemy, you have the buff for the full duration, whereas Intimidating Presence, you don't. Now lastly, we have the trait Strongback, which reduces encumbrance by 1 per trait. Not a bad trait, it will let you get some extra armor in for free essentially, but I wouldn't spec points into it over something like Bark Skin, which is just additional damage reduction, so I would just leave it on the Challenger. For their skills, we have War Stomp, which if you've played Elden Ring is basically Hoarfrost Stomp without the freeze buildup, but it does actually travel decently high as well, so you can get some flying enemies down. You get 2 charges of this and has a decent cooldown, so you're going to be using this quite often for crowd control. It's a good skill to spam for Intimidating Presence. Then we have Juggernaut, since we needed a melee skill of course, and this is everything melee could want in a skill. It gives you 3 stacks of Bulwark, which is about 13% damage reduction, 15% movement speed, and melee speed, which is great, and a whopping 50% increased melee damage, which already gets added to your Close Quarters perk. And the icing on the cake is -1 staggers, so basically enemies hitting you won't interrupt your attacks at all unless it's a big knockdown hit. So if you want a melee, you're gonna go Juggernaut. And lastly we have Rampage, which might be the strongest skill in the game. It's 15% fire rate and 20% reload speed and 10% movement speed, but then if you deal enough damage or kill enemies, you start building stacks of rage, which is 2.5% damage per stack. And at 10 stack, you enter full Berserk mode for 15 seconds. And not only does it double all the previous effects, so now you're at 30% fire rate and 40% reload speed and 20% movement speed, and now 50% more increased damage, you also get free reload and infinite ammo for that 15-second duration. It's pretty insane, and there's nothing that's going to compete with Rampage once you get that proc to go. Alright, so that's the whole Challenger kit. Obviously it's geared towards being close and personal, but it's not just a melee archetype. It can function very well with close range firearms such as shotguns and SMGs. It's definitely one of the strongest archetypes out there, and despite it not really having, sustainable damage reduction for being so close, you do get Die Hard to shrug off a death here and there. My main issue with the Challenger is that there are many bosses that fly or stay away from the player for most of the fight, so your damage bonus is basically negated, and 2 out of your 3 skills won't be helping you all that much. So I love the Challenger because I love shotguns of course. It's great for going through the game, it's just not great at bossing in general, but the bosses it does manage to stay close to, it's pretty much the king. Pair this archetype with something else that'll cover your range and you'll be just fine, but I'm going to give Challenger a solid B tier just because the bossing's pretty bad. Moving on to the Handler. This is the de facto good boy class. This is co-op for people who have no friends, or for those who would prefer to stand next to a dog rather than someone screaming into voice chat. So let's go ahead and start with its perks, traits, and skills. Starting with the prime perk, Bonded. While the Handler is your prime archetype, you do get 2 unique features for your dog. The first is that if you die, your dog will come by to resurrect you using your own dragon heart, which is then put on a 2-minute cooldown, which isn't too bad at all. The other feature is that you can command your dog to revive a downed ally so you don't have to go and revive them yourself. It's a good perk, but with the downside of you needing to use your own dragon hearts, and there will be cases early on where you have no more dragon hearts and do go down, then your dog can't revive you, so it's kind of wasted. Next, let's get to the other perks. First is the damage perk, Pack Hunter. 30% increased ranged and skill damage and 5% crit is not bad at all, but at the catch that you have to be within 25 meters of your dog. While that range is definitely large, there will be times where you send your dog out to go stop an elite or something, and it'll just be out of range, so you will then lose all your damage bonuses and your doggo's damage, which is kind of a shame, especially if your dog goes down pretty far away and you don't notice it right away. Then we have the team perk, Spirit of the Wolf. 10% movement speed and 15% reduced stamina cost of actions is very, very strong. But the cool thing here is that nearby allies will match the player's movement speed if it's higher than just this perk. So if you're loading up on a bunch of movement speed items, everybody gets all those movement speed bonuses. It's a huge team perk, it's really good. Next, the utility perk, Teamwork. This increases the revive speed as well as giving bonus damage reductions by 50% while reviving. Yep, pretty much teamwork. And lastly, we have the relic perk, Best Friend. Using a relic will fully restore your companion's health and then grant them 25% increased damage and 35% damage reduction for 15 seconds. This is a great perk, but you have to be careful not to use all your relics as you're going to need those for your revives. Lastly, we have the archetype trait, Kinship. 80% reduced friendly fire damage received and dealt. This is probably one of the best perks in the game, to be honest. I always get it, because it basically prevents you from damaging yourself with fire or explosives or pretty much anything else, which does happen a lot more than you'd imagine. I love this trait because I love explosives. Moving on to the skills, basically you have 3 different dogs. Each one has a unique passive ability as well as an active ability, but otherwise all the dogs behave exactly the same way. First skill is the guard dog, which generates a little bit more threat, 15%, and takes 20% less damage. The hold skill ability is more of that. It generates even more threat and gives all nearby allies 15% more damage reduction. The next dog, my favorite, is the support dog. This dog's passive grants 0.25% of your health regen per second for you and anyone nearby, which is actually something. It's not a lot, but it's something. But the active ability boosts this to 2% HP regen per second and increases movement speed by 25% for 25 seconds. That's a huge duration, and it's great to run through areas while healing off some of the residual damage you might have taken. The last dog, the attack dog, deals 20% more damage, which actually isn't a whole lot because the dog itself doesn't deal much damage, but the Howl will give Song of Swords to everyone and grant 20% damage to you and all nearby allies, which is pretty dang good. So that's the Handler archetype. It's very much focused around party play and reviving, and I don't believe it does anything the best. It's more of a utility archetype that's based around helping all players, including the user, but it's not about dealing the most damage. The Handler also has to micromanage the dog a lot and fight with the AI at times, which can feel like more of a chore than it's worth, especially on the later difficulties like in Nightmare and Apocalypse, because the dog doesn't really scale well. It dies all the time and doesn't do enough damage in my opinion. But again, it's a support class, it's not bad, it's just not for me since typically I don't play with teammates. I'll definitely pick up and unlock Kinship for sure, but I'm giving this archetype a C tier ranking, sorry doggo. Moving on to what's not a support archetype, the Medic. It's not a support type, trust me. Medic is the Trojan horse. You'd think it would be like the priest of the game, but you couldn't be more wrong. But let's continue with the usual format. First is the prime perk, Regenerator. This is a crazy strong perk, because every 250 HP you heal, you restore a relic charge. This includes all healing to yourself, allies, dogs, pets, anything, any healing. So you can heal yourself with your relic to recharge your relic. It's pretty crazy for the sustain. And while the heal requirement increases with each party member, it's only by 50%, not doubling for each player, so it's actually going to get easier to sustain your relics with more people. The damage trait, Invigorated, is low-key amazing. So it says 25% all damage and 5% crit. No catch, it's always up, it works for melee, ranged, mods, statuses, everything, skills. And since the archetype damage bonuses are additive, not multiplicative like Remnant 1's armor bonuses, Losing like 5 or 10% damage compared to another class like Challenger or Hunter is not a lot. It's a jack of all trades perk. The team perk, Benevolence, allows the user to heal allies with their own Dragon Heart. You don't even have to be near them. Whenever you use a relic, your teammates will just heal for 30% of their life, and that'll increase to 60% if the ally is below 35% HP. So you can definitely sustain relic spam as long as your allies are, getting hurt. The next utility perk, Backbone, increases hits the medic can take before losing Grey Health. If you're unfamiliar, Grey Health is the recoverable health. Think like a fighting game when you take a big hit, and some of that's Grey that kind of heals back over time. Same thing. Medic can take a hit and then another hit and not lose any of the Grey Health, so they can just passively regen most of the damage they take. It makes them very, very tanky. Lastly, the Relic perk, Benefactor, increases relic use speed by 20%, which is not insignificant, and also gives you -1 stagger during relic use, so you're probably not going to get interrupted whenever you use the relic. And of course, the trait Triage, which increases all healing by 50%, is insane. All healing, including passive regen, relics, items, all that stuff. The only thing that isn't included is Leech, which would be kind of broken. Alright, moving on to the skills. First skill, Wellspring. This is basically Mender's Aura from Remnant 1. It lasts 15 seconds and restores a flat 15 HP per second with a minute cooldown. This does get increased with Triage, of course. You can reliably full heal yourself and your teammates quite often, and as long as you stand in the aura, you're pretty much going to be okay. The next skill, Healing Shield. This is unironically one of the best defensive skills in the game. It quickly provides the player and all allies a bubble for 100% of their health for 10 seconds, and heals the player for 30% of their health over that duration. So it's a 3% per second heal as well. And this saves lives. Not only does it give you that time to heal back if you take a big hit, but you can proactively use it when you're at full HP to get a bubble on top of your full HP bar that will let you survive attacks that you really shouldn't. This is very important on Apocalypse mode. You're basically doubling your effective HP pool for 10 seconds, so you can face tank those big boss attacks that are coming that you're just not comfortable dodging. It's kinda gross. Redemption, the final skill, basically means that if you're alive, everyone else is gonna be alive. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, which can be reduced, but you can throw out a huge heal over time for 300% of their max HP over 10 seconds. That's 30% of their HP per second, which does get boosted with Triage. It's insane. And anyone who is downed during the cast instantly gets revived and healed. It's absurdly strong, and I don't have footage of it unfortunately because I don't have a team because I'm a loser, so sorry. Okay, so the Medic archetype. While literally everything about the kit is about healing and sustain, it doesn't diminish the fact that all this applies to the player as well as the teammate, making Medic one of, if not the tankiest archetype around. And with their Jack of all trades damage perk, they can use just about anything relatively effectively. There's really not a downside to the Medic class that I can see, besides its damage output might be a little bit lower than some other classes. My actual only complaint is that most of the skills and perks revolve around healing, so if you're playing well and don't get hit or don't get hit often, most of the kit goes unused. But still, I'm giving Medic a solid A tier because it is a perfect combination for literally any other kit. Alright, let's get into the real hard hitters, starting with the Gunslinger. And this is probably the best archetype in the game because it revolves around just shooting more, and Remnant is a game designed around shooting more. Starting with the Prime perk, Loaded. Activating any Gunslinger skill reloads both your weapons. Just think about like the LMG or other weapons with slow reloads, it's kinda crazy. Also, infinite ammo for 8 seconds, come on. So even if you somehow had no ammo with the Gunslinger, doesn't matter, here's infinite ammo for 8 seconds. It's just a kinda nutty Prime perk. And then we get into the damage perk, Swift Shot. 15% fire rate, 25% range damage, and 5% crit, no conditions. While 25% damage might seem low compared to some other classes, 15% fire rate is basically a multiplicative modifier, which definitely makes up for it. Next, the team perk, Posse Up, more ammo. Picking up ammo as a gunslinger gives ammo to your allies as well as grants ammo boxes the ability to drop more ammo for your teammates. It's an amazing team perk to keep the damage flowing. Then we have the utility perk, Quick Hands, which, let's not kid ourselves here, this is a damage perk. It's 10% reload speed and 20% reload speed if your mag is empty. That's insanely fast reloading, and reload speed is definitely helping your DPS, so this is a class that has 2 DPS perks. Lastly, we have the Relic perk, Sleight of Hand, which will reload your equipped weapon as well as grant you an additional 15% damage bonus for 10 seconds, so you can take a hit and then heal it back with a relic, and then get back to shooting with no interruptions. It's a very nice relic perk, and one that will often go unnoticed because you're just going to be staying in the action. And lastly, we have the trait Ammo Reserves, which will grant you 50% additional ammo in your reserves, which is great because you're going to be going through a lot of bullets as a gunslinger, regardless of whatever weapon you're using. Alright, onto the skills. First is Quick Draw, the bread and butter skill for the gunslinger. This quickly activated skill will instantly auto-target and distribute 6 shots evenly to enemies. These hits also guarantee critical hits, which will allow you to proc effects on crit with ease. You can also hold it to manually aim it and deliver one strong hit to an enemy instead. Think Golden Gun from Destiny. With a relatively fast cooldown, this skill will see a lot of use. The only downside to it is that technically it does skill damage, not range damage, and there's not very many ways to scale skill damage, so it does hit a wall in Apocalypse as far as damage effectiveness goes. Next, we have the skill Sidewinder. This is tailor-made for shotgun swapper builds from Remnant 1, which is a rather iconic playstyle that I've grown quite fond of. Sidewinder gives you a buff for 12 seconds, which increases your ADS movement speed, as well as your draw and weapon swap speeds by 50%. And the real icing on the cake is that it reloads both your weapons every single time you swap. So single shot weapons rejoice, you're just primed for 12 seconds of insane damage output by shooting and swapping constantly. Lastly, we have Bullet Storm. While on paper it's an okay skill, granting you 20% fire rate and 50% reload speed for 20 seconds, nothing to scoff at, the real jewel here is that it also turns all weapons fully automatic. So you can just hold down the trigger button for a shotgun or a sniper and just let the fire rate go to work, which is very powerful. The other unique effect here is that it's one of the only skills in the game that directly affects bows, which can't really be automatic anyway. They instead get 15% crit chance and 50% projectile speed, which is another great buff. So for those 20 seconds, Bullet Storm is going to be the skill to nuke bosses. The Gunslinger is hands down the best archetype in the game, as it bolsters just about every aspect of normal combat in Remnant and will scale incredibly well from starting out all the way through Apocalypse. I don't really have anything bad to say about Gunslinger, it's just the tops. Probably why it's the mascot, right? Definite S tier archetype. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have the Hunter, master of range damage, and by that I mean direct damage. Gunslinger can fire more bullets, but the Hunter can dish out much larger hits, but requires some actual precision. So let's start with the prime perk, Dead to Rights. Dealing 55 base range damage extends the duration of any Hunter skill by 3.5 seconds. 55 base damage is not like just damage, so like a sniper rifle has a base damage of 90 before you upgrade it, so that's always going to activate on a hit. But like a Tech 22 pistol does 8 base damage, so you have to land like 7 shots for the same effect. It's all based on the fire rate basically. Still, very, very powerful perk. And then we have the damage perk, which is the most damage perk in the game. It's 40% range damage, wow, and 15% more weak spot damage, geez, and 5% ranged crit. Even without the weak spot damage, Hunter would still deal the most damage out of any archetype as far as just bullets to bullets go. But 15% weak spot on top means that as long as you're hitting those juicy red numbers, you're going to be dealing significantly more damage than anyone else. Then we have the team perk, Return to Sender. When you kill enemies with a weak spot or a crit, you will have double the chance to get ammo back on kill, and then those ammo bricks you or your teammate pick up grant 50% more ammo than they should. So as long as you remain precise and land those shots, you're basically going to have no problem sustaining your ammo. The next is the utility perk, Urgency. Keeping up with the theme here, after you kill an enemy, you get 15% increased reload speed and movement speed for 5 seconds. This lets you run and gun much more efficiently than other classes, and if you're using something like a sniper, it'll make for some smooth gameplay. And lastly, we have Intuition, the Relic perk, which is a double whammy. Not only do you get to extend your skills on relic use, but killing enemies that are marked increases relic use speed by up to 50% for 15 seconds, which will allow you to sustain your skills significantly longer if you have the means to do so. Lastly, we have the Long Shot trait, which increases the ideal range of all firearms by 6 meters, which is huge, especially for shotguns and SMGs, which typically have 10 or less meters of range. And this is going to help round out the Hunter and allow them to use other things besides just snipers and rifles. Moving on to the skills, this is where Hunter really shines more. The first skill is the traditional Hunter's Mark. If you played Remnant 1, this is a bread and butter mod for everyone, but it's a skill now. 15% increased range damage and melee damage for 25 seconds is nice, but don't forget it also marks all nearby enemies, which also increases the critical chance against them by 15%. So really, it's 15% damage and 15% crit. And yes, the Hunter's Mark still allows you to see through walls, and it still applies to allies, which is great. It's not just for you. The next skill, Hunter's Focus, definitely requires more skill to actually use. Basically, you're going to be needing to aim down sights for 1 second without shooting or being interrupted. But once you do, you enter the focus state. While focused, you reduce your spread, your recoil, and your weapon sway by 75%, making you shoot lasers with basically everything including shotguns. You also get 25% range damage and 25% more weak spot damage and 10% more crit chance. And if that wasn't good enough, it lasts 20 seconds, but of course you can hold this Hunter's Focus for 10 seconds after duration ends, allowing you to prolong it with your prime perk, and it still marks enemies that you would look at, granting you even more crit chance. It's insanely powerful. The only downside to this skill is you have to keep aiming down sights, so if you ever have to dodge something, you're going to break it, which is going to be rough to maintain on bosses. But if you can reduce your aggro in a team or with a handler pet or something else, you're going to be primed for dishing out some crazy damage. Okay, the last skill, if that wasn't enough, is Hunter Shroud. This puts you into a stealth-like state, making enemies focus their attacks on an after image mostly, making it easier to avoid hits. When you attack though, you're going to break Shroud and mark all nearby enemies and gain ambush for 2 seconds. Ambush increases your ranged and melee damage by 50%, but that kind of diminishes over 2 seconds, so you really need to pop out and hit with like a sniper or some other single shot weapon really fast to make the most of it. Then you automatically go back into stealth if you don't act for a little over a second. The skill lasts 15 seconds, but of course you can extend it through relic use and weak spot or crit damage, meaning that you can sit in it for a very long time. The Hunter overall is a very powerful archetype, but it does rely on the player actually playing the game at the best, like always hitting those weak spots, managing their skills, and just being on their A game, so basically Mario. If you can do that though, you'll be rewarded with the strongest archetype available. And while I would love to put Hunter in S tier because it can sustain its skills way longer than anyone else can, and has the most uptime with the most damage, the problem is that it has a really high difficulty curve, and the archetype probably isn't going to be playing the best for a majority of the player base because you really need to have high accuracy in this game. So I would feel more comfortable giving it an A tier just because of the difficulty to play, and then obviously if you're just Mario, it could be S tier. And that's basically where we're going to be ending it on this video. These are my current rankings for each of the starting archetypes, which is by no means definitive, it's just my thoughts and opinions. Feel free to go ahead and disagree and put it in the comments and I won't read it, but thank you all for watching and do come back for more Remnant 2 content. Thanks and good luck out there.